Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs at you when you least expect them. One minute, you're living your normal everyday life, and the next, you're standing on the edge of a cliff, wondering how you got there. My name is Michael, and I've been married to Jessica for nearly 15 years. We've got 2 kids, Ethan and Sophia, who are 12 and 10, respectively. I've always been the guy who thought he had it all figured out. A decent job, a comfortable home, and a loving family. But as it turns out, that last part was nothing but a well-crafted illusion. Jessica and I met back in college. She was the kind of girl who could light up a room just by walking into it. Smart, beautiful, and full of life. We had what most would consider a fairy tale romance, at least at first. We were young, in love, and everything seemed possible. We got married soon after graduation, and our life together seemed to be going exactly as planned. We built a home, had 2 wonderful kids, and settled into what I thought was a stable, happy life. But over the past year or so, things started to change. It was subtle at first. Little things that, in hindsight, should have raised red flags. Jessica began spending more time out of the house, claiming she was catching up with old friends or attending work-related events. She'd come home late, offering vague explanations about why she had to stay out longer than expected. I trusted her, though. I never had any reason not to. Or so I thought. Our sex life, which had always been pretty active, began to decline. At first, I chalked it up to the stress of work and raising kids. We both had busy schedules, and I figured we were just tired. But then, there were other signs. She became distant, less affectionate, and more irritable. She started picking fights over the smallest things, and when I'd ask her what was wrong, she'd brush it off, saying she was just tired or stressed. One night, while Jessica was out with friends, I found myself sitting alone in our living room, sipping on a glass of whiskey and wondering when things had gotten so off. I couldn't pinpoint when the change happened, but it was there, hanging over us like a dark cloud. I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own home, disconnected from the woman I had spent more than a decade loving. It was on one of those lonely nights that I began to suspect something more sinister might be at play. Jessica had left her phone on the kitchen counter when she went out, and it buzzed with a new message. I'm not the kind of guy who snoops through his wife's phone, but something, call it intuition, made me pick it up. The message was from someone named Dave. Just a simple "can't wait to see you tonight," followed by a winking emoji. I felt my heart skip a beat. Dave? Who the hell was Dave? Jessica had never mentioned a Dave before. I stood there, staring at the phone, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A part of me wanted to believe it was innocent, just a friendly message from a coworker or something. But deep down, I knew. I knew that this was the first crack in the facade of my perfect life. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I waited. I watched. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more and more signs that something wasn't right. She'd be on her phone late at night, smiling at messages she didn't share with me. She became even more distant, and our conversations grew shorter and more superficial. It was like she was living in a different world, one that I wasn't a part of. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that I was just being paranoid, but the evidence kept piling up. I started paying closer attention to her excuses, her late nights, the way she avoided my touch. The more I saw, the harder it became to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. Something was definitely wrong, and I was beginning to fear the worst. One evening, while she was in the shower, I couldn't resist the urge any longer. I picked up her phone again and scrolled through her messages. What I found made my blood run cold. There were dozens of messages from Dave, some of them explicit, all of them filled with a kind of intimacy that should have been reserved for us, for our marriage. They talked about meeting up in hotels, about things they had done together, things they planned to do. It was all there, in black and white, undeniable proof that my wife was cheating on me. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with was betraying me in the worst possible way. I sat there, staring at the messages, feeling a mix of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. How could she do this to me? To our family? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I didn't know what to do next. Confront her? Kick her out? I felt like I was drowning in a sea of emotions, unable to think clearly. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was gone, shattered by the discovery of her betrayal. I needed time to process, to figure out what my next move would be. But one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. I wish I could say I took the high road, that I confronted Jessica calmly and rationally, but that's not what happened. I was a man consumed by rage, hurt, and a burning desire to uncover every detail of the betrayal. After discovering those messages, I became obsessed. I needed to know how deep this thing went, how long it had been going on, where it had started, and most importantly, who the hell this Dave really was. The next few days were a blur. I could barely look at Jessica without feeling a surge of anger and disgust. She was completely oblivious, going about her days as if nothing had changed. Every time she kissed me goodbye or told me she loved me, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I kept my mouth shut, biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to catch her in the act. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to catch her red-handed. I started keeping closer tabs on her. I checked her phone whenever she wasn't around, piecing together their conversations, their plans to meet. I installed a tracking app on her phone so I could follow her movements without her knowing. It didn't take long to figure out that she had been meeting this guy regularly, always under the guise of some mundane errand or night out with friends. And then there was the hotel. The hotel was their regular spot, a cheap place on the outskirts of town where they could fuck without worrying about running into anyone they knew. When I found out the exact location, it took every ounce of self-control not to storm over there immediately. But I needed more. I needed to catch them in the act, to see it with my own eyes, so there would be no way for her to lie her way out of it. Finally, the day came. She told me she was going out with some friends from work. Nothing out of the ordinary. I acted like I believed her, like the clueless husband I had been up until now. But this time, I followed her. I waited until she left the house, then grabbed my keys and tailed her from a safe distance. My heart was pounding the entire time, my mind racing with every possible scenario of what I might find. She drove straight to the hotel, confirming everything I had suspected. I parked a few blocks away and walked to the entrance, careful not to be seen. The plan was simple. Catch them in the act, confront them, and let the chips fall where they may. As I approached the room, I could hear muffled voices and laughter from the other side of the door. That laughter. It was hers, and it cut through me like a knife. I wanted to kick the door down, to burst in and drag that son of a bitch out by his neck. But I waited, listening, gathering the nerve to face the reality I already knew was true. Then I heard it. The unmistakable sounds of sex, the rhythmic creak of the bed, and her moans. Jessica's moans. It was like someone had thrown gasoline on the fire of my rage. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I just wanted to see them, to catch them in the act so I could make them both pay. Without another thought, I kicked the door open. It wasn't locked, and it flew open with a loud bang, revealing the scene I had been dreading. There they were, tangled in the sheets, her naked body straddling his, completely unaware of my presence until that moment. The shock on their faces, as they realized I was standing there, was almost satisfying, but it was nothing compared to the fury I felt. Jessica screamed, scrambling off him and trying to cover herself with the sheets. The guy, Dave, just sat there for a second, wide-eyed and stunned, like a deer caught in the headlights. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with a smug, arrogant look that made me want to punch him even before I knew who he was. The rage that had been building inside me exploded. I didn't care about the consequences. I was going to make him pay. I lunged at him, grabbing him by the throat and slamming him against the headboard. He barely had time to react before my fist connected with his jaw, sending a shockwave of pain up my arm. Jessica screamed again, trying to pull me off him, but I shoved her away, not caring if she fell or hit something. My only focus was on the guy who had dared to touch my wife, to destroy my life. He tried to fight back, but he was no match for the fury driving me. I punched him again and again, feeling the satisfying crunch of bone beneath my knuckles. Blood spattered across the sheets, across my face, but I didn't stop. I wanted him to feel every ounce of pain he had caused me. I wanted to see him suffer. He was gasping for breath, trying to plead for mercy, but I couldn't hear anything over the sound of my own rage. Jessica was crying, screaming at me to stop, but her voice was just background noise, a distant echo in my mind. I could barely see through the red haze of anger. It wasn't until Dave's face was a swollen, bloody mess that I finally stepped back, breathing hard, my knuckles throbbing from the beating I had just delivered. He was barely conscious, slumped against the headboard, groaning in pain. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the ragged breathing of the man I had just beaten to a pulp and Jessica's sobs. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't the woman I had married, the woman I had loved for so many years. She was a stranger, a traitor who had ripped our lives apart. I felt nothing but disgust for her, a deep, seething hatred that made me want to leave her there, naked and crying beside the man she had betrayed me with. I turned to leave, but Jessica grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with desperation. "Michael, please, I'm sorry. Please don't leave me," she cried, her voice trembling. I shook her off, my voice cold and flat. "You're not my problem anymore, Jessica. You made your choice. Now live with it." I spat the words at her, feeling a sick sense of satisfaction as I saw the realization of what she had done dawn on her face. I walked out of that hotel room without looking back, leaving her there with her lover, bleeding and broken on the bed. As I made my way back to my car, I felt a twisted sense of relief. The confrontation had been brutal, and it hadn't solved anything, but it was the first step in taking back control of my life. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Now, all that was left was to pick up the pieces and figure out what came next. But one thing was for certain: I would never forgive her, and I would never let her forget what she had done. Walking away from that hotel room felt like shedding a layer of skin, peeling away the last remnants of the man who had been blind to his wife's betrayal. The man who believed in the sanctity of marriage, who trusted his wife implicitly, who thought that love was enough to keep a family together. That man was gone, beaten down by the harsh reality of what Jessica had done. By the time I got home, the adrenaline that had fueled my confrontation had begun to wear off, leaving me with nothing but the dull ache of my bruised knuckles and the searing pain of betrayal burning in my chest. The house was quiet, eerily so, and it struck me how this place, once filled with laughter and love, now felt like a cold, empty shell. Everything was tainted by the knowledge of what had happened, by the truth that Jessica had so easily discarded our life together for some cheap thrill. I stood in the middle of the living room, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do next. It didn't take long for my decision to solidify. Jessica was not staying in this house. Not tonight. Not ever again. I was done. Done with her lies, done with her excuses, done with the pathetic charade of a marriage that she had turned into a joke. Not long after I arrived home, I heard the familiar sound of Jessica's car pulling into the driveway. The engine cut off, and there was a pause before I heard her footsteps approaching the door. She must have been hesitating, knowing full well what awaited her inside. The door creaked open, and there she was, standing in the doorway with her eyes red from crying, her face pale and drawn. She looked like a woman who knew her world was about to come crashing down. "Michael," she began, her voice trembling. "Please, can we talk? Save it, Jessica." I cut her off, my voice cold and hard. "There's nothing left to talk about. You can pack your things and get out." Her eyes widened, and she took a step forward, her hands outstretched as if to plead with me. "Please, Michael, just listen to me. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "Fix this?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think there's anything left to fix? You fucked another man, Jessica. You betrayed me. You betrayed our family. And now you think we can just go to some therapist and pretend it didn't happen? Are you out of your goddamn mind?" She flinched at the venom in my voice, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel every bit of the anger and disgust that was boiling inside me. I wanted her to understand that she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "I know what I did was wrong, Michael, but please, don't throw away everything we've built together," she begged, her voice cracking. "Think of the kids. They need both of us. We can work through this, I swear." I could barely stand to look at her. The sight of her, standing there with tears streaming down her face, made me sick. How dare she try to play the victim now? How dare she try to act like she cared about our family after what she had done? "You should have thought about the kids before you spread your legs for that piece of shit," I spat, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. I didn't care how harsh it sounded. I wanted her to hurt as much as I was hurting. Jessica's face crumpled, and she sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Michael, please. I'm begging you, don't do this. I made a mistake, I know that, but I love you. I love our family. I don't want to lose you. Her words only fueled my anger. How could she say she loved me, loved our family after what she had done? Love wasn't just a word you threw around to make yourself feel better. It was a commitment, a promise, and she had shattered that promise into a million pieces. I walked past her, heading toward the stairs. Get up, Jessica. You're not staying here tonight. I don't care where you go, but you're not spending another night under this roof. She scrambled to her feet, following me as I climbed the stairs. Michael, please. I'll sleep in the guest room, on the couch, whatever you want. Just don't make me leave. I'll do anything, please. Just give me a chance to make this right. I stopped halfway up the stairs and turned to face her. The desperation in her eyes was almost pitiful, but I couldn't allow myself to feel sorry for her. Not after what I had seen. Not after the way she had lied to my face over and over again. You want a chance to make this right? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Then pack your bags and get the fuck out of my house. That's the only thing you can do to make this right. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as if she was searching for the right words. But there were no right words. Not anymore. She had run out of excuses, out of lies, and now she was faced with the cold, hard reality of the situation. Michael, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't do this. I can't lose you. I'll do anything. Just tell me what to do. I turned away from her, continuing up the stairs. There's nothing you can do, Jessica. It's too late. I reached our bedroom, the place that had once been a sanctuary for us, a place of love and intimacy. Now it was just another reminder of what she had destroyed. I threw open the closet doors and grabbed one of her suitcases, tossing it onto the bed. Jessica followed me into the room, her sobs growing louder as she watched me throw her clothes into the suitcase, with no regard for their condition. Michael, stop, please. Let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, I shouted, whirling around to face her. You ruined everything, Jessica. You ruined us. You expect me to just forget about it? To let you stay here and pretend like nothing happened? That's not gonna happen. You're leaving tonight, and I don't want to see your face again. She collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in her hands as she sobbed. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction watching her break down like this. For once, she was the one suffering, the one feeling helpless and betrayed. But even that satisfaction couldn't drown out the pain that was clawing at my chest. I finished packing her suitcase and zipped it up, then tossed it onto the floor in front of her. Get out, I said, my voice cold and final. And don't come back. Jessica looked up at me, her tear-streaked face filled with a mix of desperation and despair. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Not my problem, I replied, turning away from her. Call one of your friends, go to a hotel, I don't care. Just get out. She hesitated, looking at me like she was trying to find some trace of the man who had once loved her. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who couldn't stand the sight of her. She seemed to realize that there was nothing left to say, nothing she could do to change my mind. With a shaky breath, she picked up the suitcase and stood, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Michael, I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at her as she turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps heavy and slow as she made her way down the stairs. The sound of the front door closing behind her was like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage, sealing it shut for good. I stood there in the empty bedroom, staring at the space where she had been just moments ago, and felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The anger, the rage, the satisfaction of seeing her suffer. It was all gone, leaving behind nothing but an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I had kicked her out, sent her packing, but what had it really accomplished? The house was still empty, still filled with the ghosts of what we had once been. I was alone, left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been shattered beyond repair. And as much as I wanted to believe that I was better off without her, the truth was that I didn't know what the hell I was supposed to do next. The only thing I knew for sure was that this wasn't the end. There was still more pain to come, more battles to fight, more truths to confront. But for now, I was too tired to think about any of that. I just needed to get through tonight, to find a way to keep going, even though everything I had known and loved was gone. I closed the door to the bedroom and sank down onto the bed, burying my face in my hands. The tears I'd been holding back finally came, hot and bitter, streaming down my face as I cried for everything I had lost. My marriage, my family, my life. They were all gone, destroyed by the woman I had trusted more than anyone in the world. And as I sat there in the darkness, I realized that the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was knowing that, deep down, a part of me still loved her, and that was a pain I didn't know if I'd ever be able to overcome. Kicking Jessica out of the house was only the beginning. The emptiness she left behind was quickly filled with anger and a thirst for revenge. I wasn't content to just end our marriage and let her walk away with the satisfaction of thinking she had somehow escaped the full consequences of her actions. No. I needed to make sure she felt the full weight of her betrayal. I needed her to suffer, to know that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. In the days following her departure, I stewed in my anger, plotting my next move. I wasn't interested in just hurting her emotionally. I wanted to dismantle her life piece by piece, the way she had dismantled mine. I wanted to take away everything she held dear, everything she had taken for granted, and I knew exactly how to do it. First, I made sure to gather every piece of evidence I had on her affair. The text messages, the hotel receipts, even the photos they had exchanged. I compiled it all into a neat, damning package. This was my ammunition, the proof I would use to ruin her in every way possible. She thought she could just walk away from this? She had no idea what was coming. The next step was to hit her where it would hurt the most. Her reputation. Jessica had always prided herself on being the perfect wife, the doting mother, the woman who had it all together. To the outside world, she was the epitome of grace and respectability. But I knew better now. I knew the truth, and I was going to make sure everyone else did too. It started with her friends, the same group of women she had been hanging out with for years, the ones she had likely lied to as much as she had lied to me. I sent them all an anonymous email, one that included all the juicy details of her affair, complete with screenshots of her explicit conversations with Dave. I knew it wouldn't take long for the gossip to spread like wildfire. These women lived for drama, and I had just handed them the biggest scandal of the year. Next, I moved on to social media. Jessica had always been active online, posting pictures of our family, sharing inspirational quotes, and crafting the perfect image of herself for the world to see. I hacked into her accounts, something that was surprisingly easy, given that I had access to her passwords, and posted the evidence of her infidelity for all to see. Her Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, every platform became a billboard of her betrayal. The backlash was immediate. Comments flooded in, ranging from shock to disgust to outright condemnation. Friends and acquaintances who had once admired her now saw her for what she truly was, a cheating, lying hypocrite. The carefully curated image she had built over the years was shattered in an instant, and I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction as I watched her world crumble. But I wasn't done yet. No, the real blow was yet to come. Jessica had a job at a local nonprofit, a job she loved, a job that gave her a sense of purpose and identity outside of our family. She had always been passionate about her work, and I knew that losing it would be devastating for her. So I made sure that her boss and colleagues got a copy of the evidence as well. I didn't even have to disguise my intentions. I wanted them to know exactly who she was, what she had done, and why she didn't deserve to be in a position that required trust and integrity. It wasn't long before I got the call from Jessica. Her voice was frantic, trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "Michael, what the hell did you do?" she screamed into the phone, her words barely coherent through the sobs. I could almost picture her face, twisted in panic as she realized how thoroughly her life had been dismantled. "I just made sure everyone knew the truth, Jessica. Isn't that what you wanted? The truth?" "You ruined me!" she cried, her voice breaking. "How could you do this? How could you be so cruel?" "Cruel," I echoed, my voice dripping with venom. "You think this is cruel? What you did to me, to our family, that was cruel. This is justice, Jessica. This is what you deserve. I've lost everything," she sobbed, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. "My job, my friends, everything. I can't show my face anywhere. People are calling me a whore, a slut. You've destroyed me." I felt no pity, no remorse. She had brought this on herself. She had chosen to betray me, to destroy our family, and now she was paying the price. You did this to yourself, Jessica. Maybe next time you'll think twice before you decide to fuck someone behind your husband's back. Please, Michael, she begged, her voice small and broken. Please, make it stop. I'll do anything. I cut her off with a cold laugh. You're not in a position to bargain, Jessica. You're done. I don't want to hear your voice again. I don't want to see your face. Just stay away from me, from our kids. You're nothing to me now. She tried to say something, but I hung up before she could get the words out. I wasn't interested in hearing her pathetic excuses, her desperate pleas. She was out of my life for good, and I intended to keep it that way. But even as I sat there, relishing in the satisfaction of my revenge, there was a part of me that felt hollow, empty. I had torn her life apart, destroyed her reputation, and taken away everything she held dear. But the pain in my chest hadn't gone away. If anything, it had only intensified, growing heavier with every passing day. I had thought that revenge would bring me closure, that it would help me move on from the betrayal that had shattered my world. But instead, it left me with a bitter taste in my mouth, a realization that no matter what I did to Jessica, the scars of her betrayal would never truly heal. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, lawyers, and tense negotiations as we hammered out the terms of our divorce. Jessica didn't fight me on much. She didn't have the strength, not after everything I had put her through. We agreed on shared custody of the kids, though they would primarily live with me. I made sure she wouldn't get a cent more than she deserved, and that she wouldn't be able to come crawling back for more once it was all over. When the day finally came to sign the papers, she showed up looking like a shadow of her former self. Gone was the confident, put-together woman who had once been the center of my world. In her place was someone broken, hollow, with dark circles under her eyes and a haunted look on her face. She barely met my gaze as we sat across from each other in the lawyer's office, and when it was time for her to sign, her hand trembled as she scrawled her name on the dotted line. "It's done," I said flatly, as I watched her put the pen down. "We're done." She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, we're done." There was no final confrontation, no dramatic exit. We simply walked out of the office and went our separate ways. Two people who had once shared a life now reduced to strangers. But even as I walked away from that office, the weight of it all pressed down on me. I had gotten my revenge, made Jessica suffer in ways she could never have imagined, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a hollow, empty win, one that left me with nothing but the ashes of a life that had once been full of love, trust, and hope. And as I drove home that day, the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. No amount of revenge could ever erase the pain of what had been lost. With Jessica out of my life, I thought I'd find some semblance of peace, but the truth is, I was far from done. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see them together. Jessica and that scumbag Dave, tangled up in each other like nothing else in the world mattered. It wasn't enough to just destroy Jessica's life. Dave needed to pay too. After all, he wasn't some innocent bystander. He knew she was married, knew she had a family, and still, he went ahead with it. If Jessica thought she was safe from my wrath, she had another thing coming. But first, I had to take care of Dave. I wanted to do more than just beat him senseless, more than just leave him bloody and broken in that hotel room. No, I needed to ruin him completely. I needed to take away everything that mattered to him, just like he had taken everything from me. The first step was finding out more about him. He was a little harder to track down than Jessica, but with some digging, I managed to piece together enough of his life to know where to hit him where it hurt. He was a hotshot in his field, some kind of financial advisor or consultant, one of those guys who makes a living off of telling people how to manage their money while living a life that looks perfect from the outside. He had a cushy job at a well-known firm, a reputation that had made him successful, and a fiancée. That's right, the bastard was engaged, and from the looks of it, his soon-to-be wife had no idea what kind of man she was about to marry. I couldn't wait to rip his world apart. I started by gathering all the dirt I could on him. The messages between him and Jessica were already damning, but I needed more. I wanted to completely obliterate his reputation, make sure that he couldn't walk into a room without people whispering behind his back. I found out where he lived, who his friends were, and most importantly, who his fiancée was. Her name was Emily, and from what I could gather, She was completely in the dark about Dave's extracurricular activities. One evening, after putting my kids to bed, I sat down with a glass of whiskey and started writing a letter. Not an anonymous one like I had sent to Jessica's friends, but a personal, detailed account of everything her beloved Dave had been up to behind her back. I included screenshots of their text messages, a few of the photos they had exchanged, and even a timeline of their meetings. By the time I was done, there was no doubt that Emily would know exactly who she was engaged to. The next day I mailed the letter, along with all the evidence, to Emily's workplace. I could have sent it to her home, but I wanted to make sure she received it without any chance of Dave intercepting it. This way, she'd have to open it at work, in the middle of her day, surrounded by her colleagues, no place to hide, no way to deny what she was reading. Next, I focused on Dave's professional life. I found the contact information for the partners at his firm and sent them a similar package, detailing his affair with Jessica, complete with the evidence. I made sure to emphasize how someone in his position, someone who was supposed to be trustworthy and professional, had been living a double life. I knew his firm had a strict code of conduct, and I was counting on them to take action. It didn't take long for the fallout to start. A week after I sent the letters, I got an email from one of the partners at Dave's firm. He didn't know who I was, of course, but he thanked me for bringing the matter to their attention. He informed me that they had launched an internal investigation and that Dave had been placed on indefinite leave. He assured me that the firm took these matters very seriously and that appropriate action would be taken. The next day, I heard through the grapevine that Dave had been fired. His pristine reputation, the one that had made him so successful, was now in tatters. I could only imagine the look on his face when he walked out of that office for the last time, knowing that his career was over. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to see him suffer, to watch his life fall apart right in front of him. So I started following him. It was easy enough. He wasn't exactly thinking clearly, not with everything that was happening. He had moved out of the apartment he shared with Emily, and I knew he was staying at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The same motel where he and Jessica had spent their nights together. How poetic. One evening, I parked across the street from the motel and waited. I had a front row seat to the shit show that was now his life. I saw him leave the motel, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days, his clothes wrinkled, his face haggard. He drove to a bar, one of those dive joints where you go to drown your sorrows in cheap liquor. I followed him inside and took a seat at the far end of the bar, where I could watch him without being seen. He was already a few drinks in by the time I got there, slumped over the bar with a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. The place was nearly empty, just a few regulars scattered around. But Dave was too lost in his own misery to notice me. He was muttering to himself, something about how everything had gone to hell, how he had lost everything. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. When he finally noticed me, his eyes were bloodshot, and his expression was one of pure despair. I could tell he didn't recognize me at first, but then his face twisted into a sneer. "What the fuck do you want?" he slurred, his words barely coherent. I leaned back in my seat, a cold smile spreading across my face. "Just here to check in on you, Dave. How's life treating you these days?" Recognition flickered in his eyes, and his face went pale. You're her husband. That's right," I interrupted, my voice low and even. "I'm the guy whose life you tried to ruin. How does it feel, Dave? How does it feel to have your entire world ripped apart?" He stared at me, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. He was too drunk to think clearly, too broken to fight back. "You did this," he muttered, his voice shaking. "You ruined my life." "No," I corrected him, leaning in closer. "You ruined your life. You chose to fuck my wife. You chose to betray your fiancé. All I did was make sure you faced the consequences." He didn't have anything to say to that. He just sat there, staring into his glass, his hands trembling. The man who had once been so cocky, so sure of himself, was now a pathetic shell of who he used to be. "Tell me, Dave," I continued, my voice cold as ice. "How does it feel to lose everything? Your job, your fiancé, your future? Was it worth it? Was she worth it?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and despair. "Fuck you," he spat. But there was no strength behind the words. He was beaten, broken. I leaned back again, satisfied with his misery. Enjoy the rest of your life, Dave, whatever's left of it. With that, I stood up and walked out of the bar, leaving him to drown in his sorrows. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, and I felt a strange sense of relief. I had done it. I had taken everything from him, just as he had taken everything from me. The satisfaction of seeing him so utterly destroyed was bittersweet, but it was enough. It wasn't until I got back into my car that the full weight of what I had done started to settle in. I had spent weeks consumed by anger, plotting my revenge, and now that it was over, I wasn't sure what was left. I had torn apart Jessica's life, ruined Dave's career, and shattered his future. But the ache in my chest hadn't gone away. If anything, it had only grown heavier. I had gotten my revenge, but what had it really accomplished? My marriage was still over, my family was still broken, and I was still alone. The destruction I had caused didn't fill the void left by Jessica's betrayal. It didn't bring back the trust that had been shattered or the love that had been lost. As I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I had crossed a line that I could never uncross. The man I had become in my quest for revenge was someone I barely recognized, someone consumed by anger and bitterness. And as much as I wanted to believe that I had won, the truth was that no one had won. We were all just casualties of a war that had no real victor. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the darkened windows of the house that had once been my home. I had destroyed everything that had mattered to Jessica and Dave, but the emptiness inside me was still there, gnawing at me, reminding me that no amount of revenge could ever fix what had been broken. And as I finally got out of the car and walked into the house, I realized that the only thing I had truly destroyed was myself. Days turned into weeks after I had dismantled Jessica's and Dave's lives, and the high from my revenge was long gone. What lingered was the emptiness, the gnawing realization that while I had inflicted as much pain as possible on them, I was still left with the ruins of what had once been my life. The house felt like a mausoleum, filled with echoes of the past, and the silence was suffocating. I spent most of my days going through the motions, taking care of the kids, going to work, coming home to a place that no longer felt like home. The kids were confused and hurt, sensing the tension, but not understanding the full extent of what had happened. I tried to shield them from the worst of it, but there was no hiding the fact that their mother was gone, and everything had changed. It was on a particularly cold, rainy evening that Jessica called. I hadn't heard from her since the day I kicked her out, and I wasn't exactly eager to hear from her now. But there was something in the way the phone buzzed in my pocket, something in the way her name lit up the screen, that made me hesitate before sending the call straight to voicemail. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Michael." Her voice was soft, hesitant, and filled with a kind of weariness that mirrored my own. "Can we talk? Please?" I didn't say anything for a long moment. Part of me wanted to hang up, to end the conversation before it could even start. But there was another part, a part I wasn't ready to admit existed, that wanted answers, that needed some kind of closure. "Yeah," I finally said, my voice flat. "We can talk." She let out a breath, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "Thank you, I'm outside. Can I come in?" I hesitated, the words, "No, go to hell," hovering on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't bring myself to say them. Instead, I found myself walking to the front door, pulling it open, and there she was, standing in the rain, soaked to the bone and shivering. She looked different. The confident, composed woman I had known was gone, replaced by someone who looked fragile, broken. Her hair was plastered to her face, and her eyes were red, puffy from crying. She was holding a small, battered suitcase, the same one I had thrown at her the night I kicked her out. I stepped aside, letting her in without a word. She crossed the threshold cautiously, like she was afraid the house might reject her, and I couldn't help but notice how small she seemed, how much she had shrunk in the weeks since I last saw her. We stood in the hallway, the sound of rain pounding against the windows filling the silence between us. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for letting me in." I didn't respond. Instead, I gestured toward the living room, and she nodded, walking past me to the room that had once been the heart of our home. I followed her, the familiar scent of damp earth and rain-soaked clothes filling the air, mingling with the stale smell of a house that had been too empty for too long. She sat down on the edge of the couch, clutching the suitcase to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I took a seat in the armchair across from her, the distance between us feeling like a chasm that neither of us knew how to cross. "I've been staying with my sister," she began, her voice trembling. "But I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't take the way she looked at me like I was someone else. Like I was this horrible person who had done something unforgivable. I stared at her, my face a mask of indifference. But inside, I was reeling. This was the woman who had shattered my world, the woman I had loved more than anything. And yet I barely recognized her. The anger that had fueled me for so long was still there, but it was muted, overshadowed by a deep, aching sadness. "Maybe because you are that person," I said, my voice hard. "You did something unforgivable, Jessica. You betrayed me, you betrayed our family, and now you want what? Forgiveness? A chance to come back?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Michael. I know I don't deserve it. I know I've ruined everything. I just needed to talk to you, to explain, to try and make you understand." "Understand?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "What's there to understand? You slept with another man, lied to my face, destroyed everything we built together, and now you want to talk?" She winced at my words, but she didn't back down. "I know I can't fix this, Michael. I know that, but I need you to know that it wasn't about you. It wasn't because I didn't love you, because I did. I still do." "Bullshit!" I snapped, the anger bubbling to the surface. "You don't destroy someone you love, Jessica. You don't tear their life apart for some meaningless fling." "It wasn't meaningless," she said, her voice cracking. "It was wrong, and I know that. But it wasn't meaningless. I was lost, Michael. I was so lost, and I didn't know how to find my way back. Dave, he was a mistake, a horrible mistake. But he wasn't the problem. I was the problem." I shook my head, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "You had a choice, Jessica. You could have talked to me. You could have asked for help, but instead you decided to fuck another man. You chose to destroy us." "I know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I was selfish, and I wasn't thinking about anyone but myself. I've lost everything because of it, and I deserve that. But the worst part is knowing that I hurt you, that I hurt our kids. I would do anything to take it back, to undo the damage I've caused. But I know I can't." I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that sorry wasn't enough, that no amount of regret could ever undo what she had done. But as I looked at her, broken and defeated, I realized that there was nothing left to say. The damage was done, and there was no going back. "What do you want, Jessica?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Why are you here?" She hesitated, her hands trembling as she clutched the suitcase tighter. "I don't know," she admitted. I guess I wanted to see if there was anything left, if there was any chance that we could find a way forward for the kids' sake, for us." "Us?" I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "There is no us anymore, Jessica. Whatever we had, whatever we were, it's gone. You destroyed it." She flinched at my words, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "I know," she whispered, "but I still love you, Michael. I still want to be with you, even if it's too late." Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. For so long I had wanted to hear those words, had longed for her to say that she still loved me, that she wanted to be with me. But now, they felt hollow, meaningless. They couldn't change what had happened, couldn't erase the betrayal that had shattered our lives. "I don't know if I can ever love you again, Jessica," I said, my voice raw. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And without trust, without love, there's nothing left. We can't go back." The truth of my words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, I saw the last flicker of hope die in her eyes. She nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand," she whispered. I I guess I just needed to hear you say it. I looked away, unable to bear the sight of her broken, tear-streaked face. The woman who had once been my everything was now nothing more than a painful memory, a reminder of everything I had lost. "What about the kids?" she asked, her voice small. "Can I see them? Can we figure something out?" The thought of having to co-parent with her, of having to see her regularly, filled me with dread. But the kids were innocent in all of this, and they deserved to have both parents in their lives, no matter how much I wanted to erase Jessica from mine. "They're your kids too," I said, my tone resigned. "We'll figure something out, but you need to understand that this is the end for us. There's no going back." She nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. I'll go now." She stood up slowly, still holding the suitcase like a lifeline. For a moment, she hesitated, as if she wanted to say something else, but then she just turned and walked toward the door. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow as the distance between us grew. She paused at the threshold, her hand on the doorknob, and looked back at me one last time. "Goodbye, Michael," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her, leaving me alone in the quiet, empty house. I sat there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had stood, feeling the weight of finality settle over me. This was it. The end of everything we had once been. The end of the life we had built together. There was no more anger, no more revenge to plan. All that was left was the hollow ache of loss, the painful reality that nothing would ever be the same. As I sat in the silence, the tears I had been holding back finally came, hot and bitter, streaming down my face as I cried for the life that was gone, the love that had been lost, and the man I would never be again. The last conversation with Jessica had closed the chapter on our life together, but it hadn't brought the closure I had hoped for. Instead, it left me with the realization that moving on was going to be harder than I ever imagined. The past was a weight I would carry for a long time, but for the sake of my kids, for the sake of my own sanity, I knew I had to find a way forward, even if that meant doing it alone. In the weeks following that final conversation with Jessica, life settled into a new, uneasy normal. The kids and I established a routine, trying to find some sense of stability in a world that had been upended by betrayal. I had expected that confronting Jessica and exacting my revenge would give me some sort of closure, but instead, it had left me with a gnawing emptiness. The reality of being a single parent hit hard, and every day felt like a battle against the memories of what once was. Jessica and I communicated only when necessary, mostly about the kids. We decided to keep things as civil as possible for their sake, but the tension was always there, just beneath the surface. It was like walking on a tightrope. One wrong move, one misstep, and everything could come crashing down. The anger that had once fueled me had burned out, leaving behind a deep sadness that was hard to shake. We agreed on a custody arrangement where the kids would stay with me during the week and spend weekends with Jessica. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best we could do under the circumstances. The first time I dropped them off at her new apartment, a small, modest place on the other side of town, the kids were nervous, unsure of how to navigate this new life. I watched them walk up to the door, backpacks slung over their shoulders, and felt a pang of guilt. They were the innocent victims in all of this, caught in the crossfire of their parents' mistakes. Jessica opened the door and greeted them with a strained smile. She looked better than she had the last time I saw her, less haggard, more put together, but there was still a sadness in her eyes that mirrored my own. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable, before ushering the kids inside. We didn't exchange any words, just a brief nod of acknowledgement before the door closed, leaving me standing there alone. As I drove home, I couldn't help but think about how everything had gone so wrong. This wasn't the life I had envisioned for myself, for my family. We were supposed to grow old together, watch our kids graduate, get married, have kids of their own. But now all those dreams had been shattered, replaced by a cold, harsh reality that I was still struggling to accept. I knew I couldn't stay stuck in the past forever, though. I had to find a way to move forward, for myself and for my kids. But the question was, how? How do you rebuild a life that's been torn apart by betrayal? How do you find peace when every corner of your home, every moment of your day, is a reminder of what you've lost? One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I sat down with a bottle of whiskey and stared at the divorce papers that had been sitting on my kitchen table for days. I had signed them already, but I hadn't been able to bring myself to send them off. There was something so final about it, so definitive. Once those papers were filed, there would be no going back, no more chances, no more hope for reconciliation. But the truth was, there was nothing left to reconcile. The marriage was dead, and the man I had been when I stood at the altar with Jessica was gone. What was left was a shell, a man who had been broken by love and was now just trying to find a way to survive. I poured myself a drink and picked up the pen. The finality of it all weighed heavily on me as I wrote my name one last time, completing the legal process that would make our separation official. As I signed, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with sorrow. It was done. The marriage that had once been the center of my life was now just a stack of papers, a legal contract that had been broken beyond repair. The next day, I mailed off the divorce papers. It was a quiet, unremarkable moment, but it marked the end of an era. I watched the envelope disappear into the mailbox and felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was over, and while that brought a certain sadness, it also brought a sense of freedom. The past was behind me, and the future, uncertain as it was mine to shape. But moving on wasn't as simple as filing divorce papers. The scars of what had happened were still fresh, and I knew that I needed help to navigate the complicated emotions that were eating away at me. So, after a lot of hesitation, I decided to see a therapist. It wasn't something I had ever considered before, but I knew that if I didn't confront the pain head-on, it would consume me. Dr. Reynolds was a kind, middle-aged man with a calm demeanor that made it easy to open up. In our first session, I found myself spilling everything: the betrayal, the anger, the revenge, the emptiness that had followed. It was like a dam had burst, and all the emotions I had been bottling up came pouring out. "You've been through a lot, Michael," Dr. Reynolds said after I had finished. "It's understandable that you're feeling lost right now. Betrayal has a way of shaking us to our core, making us question everything we thought we knew about ourselves and our relationships." "I just don't know how to move on," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "I thought revenge would make me feel better, but it didn't. It just made everything worse. Now I'm stuck in this place where I can't let go of the past, but I can't seem to move forward either." Dr. Reynolds nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Revenge can feel satisfying in the moment, but it often leaves us feeling empty afterward. That's because it doesn't address the underlying pain. It just distracts us from it. What you're feeling now is the aftermath of that distraction. The anger is gone, but the pain remains." "So what do I do?" I asked, desperate for some kind of guidance. "You need to allow yourself to grieve, Michael," he said gently. "Grief isn't just about death. It's about loss. You've lost your marriage, your sense of trust, your sense of identity as a husband. Those are significant losses, and it's okay to mourn them. But at the same time, you need to start rebuilding. That means finding new ways to define yourself, new ways to find meaning and joy in your life." It was easier said than done, but I knew he was right. I had spent so much time focused on what I had lost that I hadn't even considered what I could still gain. The idea of rebuilding my life from scratch was daunting, but it was also a challenge that I needed to face. Over the next few months, I threw myself into the process of healing. Therapy became a lifeline, a place where I could unload the weight of my emotions without fear of judgment. I started exercising again, something I had neglected during the chaos of the past year. I reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from during the marriage, and found comfort in their support. I also made a conscious effort to be more present for my kids. They were hurting too, and I realized that I needed to be strong for them, to show them that life could go on, even after something as devastating as a divorce. We started doing more activities together: hiking, biking, movie nights. anything that brought us closer as a family. Slowly, the tension in the house began to ease, and the laughter that had been absent for so long started to return. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Ethan looked at me with a serious expression. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" he asked, his voice small. I paused, taken aback by the question. I had been so focused on my own pain that I hadn't considered how much the kids needed reassurance. I reached across the table and took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Yeah, buddy," I said, my voice steady. "We're going to be okay. Things are different now, but that doesn't mean they're bad. We still have each other, and that's what matters." Sophia, who had been quietly listening, chimed in. "But what about Mom? Is she going to be okay?" It was a question I had asked myself many times, and I wasn't sure I had the answer, but I knew I needed to be honest with them. "Mom's going through a tough time right now, but she's going to be okay too. She loves you both very much, and she's trying her best just like I am." They nodded, their expressions thoughtful, and I realized that they were trying to make sense of the situation just as much as I was. We were all in this together, navigating uncharted territory, but the important thing was that we weren't doing it alone. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I found myself slowly coming to terms with the new reality. The pain of the past was still there, but it wasn't as sharp, and the emptiness I had felt was beginning to fill with something new. Hope. Hope that life could be good again, that I could find happiness, not in spite of what had happened, but because I had survived it. One day, after a particularly good session with Dr. Reynolds, I found myself driving past a park where Jessica and I used to take the kids when they were younger. On a whim, I decided to stop and walk around, letting the memories wash over me. There was a time when the sight of that park would have brought nothing but pain. But now, as I stood there watching the kids play, I felt a sense of peace. I realized that while my marriage to Jessica had ended, it didn't mean the end of my story. It was just a chapter, a painful one, but a chapter nonetheless. There were still more pages to be written, more life to be lived. As I stood there, I made a promise to myself. I would keep moving forward, keep rebuilding, not just for myself, but for my kids. I would find joy again, love again, and maybe even trust again. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally ready to let go of the past and embrace the future, whatever it might hold. The decision to embrace the future didn't happen overnight, but once I made up my mind, everything began to shift. It was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and I started to see the world in a different light. My life was far from perfect, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I had hope. Hope that things could get better, that I could rebuild from the ashes of my old life and create something new, something that was truly mine. The kids and I settled into our new routine, and slowly, the tension that had filled our home began to dissipate. The house, once a painful reminder of the life I had lost, started to feel like home again. We filled it with new memories, weekend trips, movie marathons, and dinners where we laughed and talked about everything under the sun. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was ours, and that made it enough. The healing process was slow, but with each passing day, I found myself thinking less about the past and more about the possibilities that lay ahead. I had been through hell, but I had come out the other side stronger, more resilient. The pain of Jessica's betrayal would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was no longer just the man whose wife had cheated on him. I was a father, a friend, a man who had survived and was now ready to live again. One day, while I was at the park with the kids, I ran into an old friend from college, someone I hadn't seen in years. Her name was Laura, and she was there with her daughter, a bright, bubbly little girl who immediately hit it off with Sophia and Ethan. As the kids ran off to play, Laura and I sat down on a bench and caught up on lost time. Laura had been through her own set of challenges. A divorce a few years back, followed by a move to a new city where she didn't know anyone. But like me, she had found a way to rebuild, to create a new life for herself and her daughter. As we talked, I realized how much we had in common, how much we understood each other in ways that only people who had been through similar experiences could. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself genuinely enjoying someone else's company. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people sharing a moment in the sun, talking about life and everything it had thrown at them. It was refreshing, and I felt a connection with her that I hadn't felt with anyone since Jessica. After that day, Laura and I started seeing more of each other. We'd meet up for coffee, take the kids to the park, or just sit and talk while the kids played. It was all very casual at first, just two friends reconnecting. But as time went on, something deeper began to develop. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, to the way she made me laugh, to the easy companionship that came with spending time together. One evening, after the kids were in bed, I found myself thinking about her, about how much I enjoyed being around her, how much I looked forward to our next meeting. It was a strange feeling, this growing warmth in my chest, but it was also a welcome one. It had been so long since I had allowed myself to feel anything beyond the pain and anger of the past. And now, here was this person who was making me feel happy. It was a simple emotion, but one that I had almost forgotten existed. I was hesitant at first, unsure if I was ready to let someone new into my life. But as the weeks went by, I realized that what I had with Laura wasn't just a rebound or a distraction. It was something real, something that had the potential to grow into more. She was kind, understanding, and she didn't push me to move faster than I was comfortable with. She was content to let things unfold naturally, and that was exactly what I needed. One night, after a particularly fun day at the park with the kids, Laura and I found ourselves sitting on my front porch, watching the sunset. The kids were inside, playing video games and laughing, their voices drifting out through the open windows. The air was cool, the sky painted with shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. "Thank you for today," I said, turning to look at her. "I don't think I've had this much fun in a long time." She smiled, her eyes warm and understanding. "I'm glad. You deserve it, Michael. You've been through so much, and it's good to see you smiling again." I looked down, suddenly feeling shy. I didn't think I'd be able to smile again, not after everything that happened. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," she said softly. "You've built a new life for yourself and your kids. That's something to be proud of." "I couldn't have done it without them," I admitted. "They're the reason I kept going, even when it felt impossible." "They're lucky to have you," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "And so am I." I looked at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her words. There was a tenderness in her eyes, a warmth that made my heart skip a beat. For a moment, we just sat there, the world around us fading away as we looked at each other. And then, before I could second-guess myself, I leaned in and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When we pulled away, I saw the same emotions mirrored in her eyes: hope, affection, and the promise of something new. "I'm glad you're here," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Me too," she replied, her smile soft and genuine. From that moment on, things between Laura and me began to change. What had started as a friendship blossomed into something deeper, something that brought a sense of joy and excitement back into my life. We took things slow, both of us cautious after the wounds we had endured. But the connection we shared grew stronger with each passing day. The kids were thrilled about our relationship, especially since they had already grown close to Laura's daughter. It was heartwarming to see them all playing together, laughing and bonding in a way that made our blended family feel complete. As time went on, I found myself thinking less about the past and more about the future. The pain of what had happened with Jessica was still there, but it no longer consumed me. I had found a way to move forward, to create a life that was full of love, laughter, and the possibility of something beautiful. One afternoon, as we sat in the backyard, watching the kids play, Laura turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Have you ever thought about what comes next?" she asked, her tone light but curious. "What do you mean?" I asked, smiling at her. "Us," she said simply. "Where do you see us going?" I paused, considering her question. It was something I had thought about often, but I hadn't wanted to push too hard or move too fast. But the truth was, I could see a future with her, a future that was bright and full of promise. I see us continuing to build this life together, I said honestly. I see us being happy, raising our kids, and maybe even more. She smiled, her eyes shining with affection. I like the sound of that. Me too, I said, reaching out to take her hand. I'm not rushing anything, but I know that I want you in my life, Laura. I want us to see where this goes, to see what we can build together. She squeezed my hand, her smile widening. I want that too, Michael. I'm not afraid of the future anymore. Not with you by my side. In that moment, I knew that we were both ready to move forward, to embrace whatever life had in store for us. The past was still a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had found love again, not in spite of what had happened, but because I had allowed myself to heal, to open up, and to trust again. The journey hadn't been easy, but as I looked at Laura, at our kids laughing and playing in the sunshine, I realized that it had all been worth it. I had found a new life, a new love, and a new beginning. And this time, I knew that I was finally where I was meant to be.